Charles Susa is crossing his fingers and toes that Ontario's economy continues to chug along because if it does, he expects to balance the budget next year. Here now, the highlights of Budget 2016-17, which the Finance Minister unveiled at 4 o'clock this afternoon at Queen's Park. The fiscal plan for the province of Ontario, it will spend $133.9 billion starting April 1st of this year. And what's the number one priority? Well, it's always healthcare. $51.8 billion. That's actually only up 2% from last year. They've really broken the healthcare cost curve. Less than 40% of the budget expenditures. Education is number two at $25.6 billion. We do, of course, owe a lot of money. The total debt of the province of Ontario to the end of this fiscal year, which is the end of March, $296 billion. The interest annually that we pay on that debt, it's the fourth biggest item in the budget, $11.8 billion. However, we are borrowing money at 3.6% interest rates, historically low. However, if rates do go up, just a 1% rise in interest rates, that would be the equivalent of $350 million new dollars. Now, there were some happy surprises in the budget. For example, harmonized sales tax, the provincial sales tax revenue, $500 million plus more than expected. The land transfer tax, reflecting a really hot Toronto housing market, more than $300 million north of what they expected. We love to gamble, and we love to buy those lottery tickets. They took in $159 million more than expected last year, more than $2 billion in lottery and gaming. And same for drinking. We do love our booze. They took in $58 million more than expected. Again, nearly $2 billion in revenues from the LCBO. Now, how about the deficit situation? The anticipated deficit for 2015-16, that's the budget year we're leaving, $5.7 billion. That's 2.8 lower than they thought. The budget deficit projected for the fiscal year we're about to enter, $4.3 billion. That's for 16-17, and again towards a balance in 17-18, an election year incidentally, and balanced again, they say, in 18-19. No tax cuts per se in this budget, but if you look at what's happened to the price of oil, we sort of got one. Consumers and businesses saved $6.6 billion in 2015. That's basically, the budget says, a $500 savings to the average Ontario household. You know about the new cap and trade plan. It plans to cap the amount of greenhouse gas pollution that businesses and institutions can emit. If they want to exceed that cap, they will have to purchase additional carbon credits. The purchase of those credits expects to generate almost $500 million this fiscal year for the Treasury, up to $1.9 billion annually eventually. For consumers, that means when you gas up, 4.3 cents per litre more on the price of gas. For home heating, it's $5 more a month. For post-secondary education, the government says, quote, we are transforming financial assistance. And here's what they've got in mind. They want to redirect all the money currently spent on several different tuition grant programs and create a new single Ontario student grant. The idea being to get low-income people into post-secondary. So, for example, families with a household income of less than $50,000 a year, the average cost of your tuition going forward will be free. Smoking. Smoking still kills. Budget says it's the number one cause of death and disease in Ontario, 13,000 deaths each year, and so the province intends to increase the tobacco tax by $3 a carton of 200 cigarettes, and it will increase tobacco taxes annually by the rate of inflation. How about energy savings? They're going to spend money to allow 37,000 homeowners to reduce their energy bills by having energy audits done of their homes. So you can potentially find out if your house needs a retrofit by replacing the furnace or the water heater or upgrading the insulation. And finally, just some other notables in this budget. They're going to reduce hospital parking fees, so some savings there. They're going to eliminate the $30 drive clean emissions test fee, some savings there. You know about the expanding of beer and wine sales in grocery stores. Seniors, a few things for you. Free shingles vaccines for eligible seniors aged 65 to 70. There are 170,000 seniors who will be eligible to pay less for their prescription drugs. However, for higher income seniors, the deductible on your medication is going to increase to $170 from $100, and your co-payments are going to be higher too. And now to the man of the hour, the man who's been Ontario's Minister of Finance for 3 years and 2 weeks. Here's Charles Susa, the MPP for Mississauga South, who joins us now from the Frost Block at Queen's Park. Minister, you know how this goes. We want to get a better understanding of how and why you made the decisions that you did today and unveiled in the budget. So let's start with this. Corporate taxes. The budget does tell us that we have the second lowest corporate tax rate of any province in Canada, and if you compare us to, say, the European Union or the United States, we still have very low and competitive corporate tax rates. If that's true, that presumably gives you some wiggle room to raise them if you want to realize more revenue. You chose not to, and I'm wondering why.
We want to maintain a very competitive and dynamic business climate. And we know that when corporate taxes are low and we provide for some of those incentives, more investments are made. And in Ontario, we now have been the top destination for foreign direct investment, beating out every other state, every other province, and that enables Ontario to have greater success. We're also partnering with business, and we made that very clear as one of our major pillars with the Business Growth Initiative. We want to scale up more companies in Ontario. We want to provide for greater hubs and with academic and with innovation. All of that is part of the plan to grow the economy and create jobs, and it's working.
Let's talk about the deficit. As I mentioned in the intro, you are pledging a balanced budget next year and the following fiscal year after that as well. And as you look at the economic storm clouds that are out there, what, if anything, could knock us off that balanced budget as you look at it today?
Well, there are a lot of challenges out there, Steve, and certainly the economy is uncertain around the world and right here in North America. It is why I've taken a lot of prudence in the measures that we put in place when we project our economic growth. We've taken some of those challenges, we're taking them head on, and we're being bold. I mean, we're taking on a cap and trade program, recognizing that it is also an innovation strategy. It provides for new economic opportunities in the clean tech environment. And it enables us to stay ahead of the curve because everywhere around the world, they're going to a low carbon economy. We can't turn our backs on that. Not for our children and grandchildren who want cleaner air, certainly not for the people of Ontario who want secure jobs in the future. And that's exactly why we're headed this way, and we're working closely to enable, again, to grow the economy and create more jobs.
I will ask you about cap and trade more in a second, but I just one more follow-up on the balanced budget situation. Come hell or high water, as a former Liberal finance minister federally once said, the budget will be balanced next year, yes?
The budget will be balanced next year in 2017-18, and will be balanced again the year after that. And that same finance minister has given me quite a bit of advice over the years. And I recognize all too well that we must chip away at the deficit without sacrificing the very services and programs that are important to Ontarians and that generate economic growth. Some would ask us to slash across the board, which would put our economy at risk. Some would rather us spend even more and raise taxes and revenue, which also would put our economy at risk. We must take a very balanced approach down the middle. It helps grow the economy. It helps balance the books in a sustainable way, and that's what we're doing.
For those who don't know, of course, we're talking about Paul Martin. Let's move on to cap and trade. I wonder if you can point to any public opinion research that your government may have done which would indicate what the public thinks about a 4.3 cent per litre rise in the price of gas in order for motorists to make their contribution to the cap and trade plan.
We have actually spoken to a lot of people across the province and across the country. Many have seen in other regions the economy actually have an uptick as a result of some of these measures to put price on carbon. Your kids would tell you that they want us to be good stewards of the economy and good stewards of the environment. It's incumbent upon us to stay ahead. And we have mitigation when it comes to home heating and certainly electricity pricing, quite a bit, in fact, that's going to give them greater benefit. And when it comes to pollution, you pay for what you pollute. You pay less, you pollute less. We're trying to encourage that behavior going forward. We're trying to encourage an innovation that allows for electrical vehicles and electrical stations around the province. That's just another means by which to not only provide for greater conservation, but again, more innovation in the economy.
Let me ask why you
will pay less.
Okay, let me ask why you didn't encourage people a little more. You do point out in the budget that the price of gas last year dropped about 34 cents a litre. People saved, if you add it all up, billions of dollars on gas payments last year. You're only knocking it up 4.3 cents a litre. Seems to some people that you probably could have done more. How come not?
Actually, what we've done has been very open and transparent with what we estimate the cost will be, because those costs are actually embedded in the wholesale price of gas. It's not a tax that we're providing for at the outside. It's actually embedded. So we wanted people to be well aware of what the overall impact would be for them, because we're being open. But at the same time, we want people to have more spending, and that helps our economy. We want to make everyday life easier for Ontarians. So what we want is a balanced approach. We're not going to go and take advantage of a commodity issue, because those commodity prices will come back too. So we got to be realistic.
Okay, Minister, one of, I think, the highest profile promises you've made in this budget is to take all of the money that you're currently spending on post-secondary education for grants and tax credits and loans and that kind of thing, and wrapping up all of those different programs in one new thing you're calling the Ontario Student Grant. What's the thinking there?
Well, it's all about encouraging students to go to post-secondary, to provide for higher attainments so that they can have greater prosperity. And Steve, there's so many students at the who are in poverty or at the low end of the income spectrum that think that, you know, post-secondary is beyond their reach because of the sticker shock. And then students that are there now say it's convoluted, complex, and they don't even know how to navigate through the system. So yes, we're restructuring the existing program, enabling more students to have free tuition at the outset so that they know they can continue going forward. We're still providing support for middle-income families as well, with free loans. And we're going to do away with the education tax credits that students don't understand and don't get any benefit from, and reinvest that so that we can have even more students. We would like nothing more to see the system oversubscribed. And I've also put that in the budget just in case, because we want to see more education going forward.
One of your predecessors, who's going to be on this program a little later, Greg Sorbera, had the idea when he was the minister. He never got it through, but he had the idea to give free community college access to any qualified student who wanted to go. You obviously didn't go that far today, and I'm wondering why.
Well, actually, community colleges are actually going to give even a higher benefit than some of the universities. So many of those students will have even greater support systems. And Mr. Sorbera is actually an individual who's inspired me to try to even do more to give back and to make our society much more fair. And it's one of the issues and one of the initiatives that we've put in place in this budget. It is about being progressive. It's also about being very fiscally responsible to come to balance, to enable a sustainable process for future generations to benefit, managing our debt, ensuring that our debt to GDP ratio keeps coming down, ensuring that our deficits are eliminated, and ensuring that we control and monitor the interest on that debt going forward by locking them in long term. A lot of that, Mr. Sorbera knows all too well how important that is, and I thank him for being on your show, and maybe he can also give me continued advice as we move forward.
Oh, I'm sure he'd love to do that, and I'll get some for you, don't worry.
Oh, he's not afraid of doing so.
Correct on that. Let me ask you about something that hasn't got much attention so far, but it was a very small item in today's budget, and it intrigued me, the Basic Income Pilot Project. This sounds like it's a bit of an attempt to find out whether or not Ontario could move to, rather than the mishmash of assistance programs we have right now, to a guaranteed annual income. And I guess I want to know what city you're going to study it in, when you're going to start the study, and how you intend to move on it.
So we're going to start looking at this year. I'm not sure which city has been identified at this point. It is something that's been debated and talked about for many years, and certain other parts of the world have incorporated this, and I look forward to seeing what the results will be. But you're right, it is a bit of a convoluted system. We've increased support for OW and ODSP by 1.5% in the budget. We have greater services and provisions for others in need. But it'd be, and of course we've increased minimum wage and we've indexed that. So all those supports are helping the labor market, are helping the workforce. We would like to see what we can do to make it simpler, more convenient, more efficient. We'll see how this plays out, and I'm looking forward to that.
You are increasing taxes on smokers, and I do recall many years ago when the government did raise the tax on smokers, all it ended up doing was increasing the desire for contraband product. And I guess I'm wondering why you think that won't happen again this time.
Well, I'm sensitive to that very much. I mean, first off, we're trying to provide for cessation of smoking. It also helps our health costs on the long term. But the contraband aspect of it, we are very vigilant in terms of going after those that through a squad that we've established, through some of the raw leaf enforcement practices, all of that to curb the activity. And we're also in discussions with some of those groups to try to legitimize their operations so that they pay their fair share of taxes as well.
Okay. Let me ask you a question about, I guess one of the criticisms I've heard is that the pre-budget hearings that you held all across the province, where you got submissions in from members of the public, you got more than 4,000 comments from people, 1,800 different ideas. You've heard the criticism before that this is basically showbiz and that you guys do this to make it look good, but then you do whatever you want. And I guess I'm going to ask you for one concrete suggestion. I guess most of the suggestions you got, the largest number was about education. So give me one idea about education that you got from a member of the public that showed up in today's budget.
The grant system, providing a free tuition and enablement of easier access. A number of other things. Palliative care was another that many wanted for the most frail and elderly, and end-of-life care. That came up in our discussions as well. And there's many, Steve. The budget actually has a page identifying much of the correlation between what people are asking for and what we've delivered upon. Health care, schools, and hospitals, all of which are going to receive increased funding going forward as well.
Minister, let me ask you one more question because I want to stay on time here, and that is, I presume one of the reasons why you need to raise taxes on people who pay taxes is because there are still too many people evading taxes that they are supposed to pay. And I'm wondering what you're doing to shake the nickels out of the trees of that underground economy.
Well, first off, we're not increasing taxes to individuals in this budget. Secondly,
well, wait a second. You are raising taxes. Hang on. Let's be clear. You are raising taxes on smokers. You're raising taxes on drinkers. That is fair to say.
No, I'm talking. I was referring to you said income taxes. So I just want to make certain that that's understood. Okay. But we are going after the contribution. We are going after the underground economy. $1 billion was achieved last year in added revenue because of the measures we've taken against tax avoidance, and we're going to continue doing so. I talked about zappers in the retail sector in the last budget. We're looking at what Quebec has done to try to mirror them, and I've already discussed that with the federal government to enable us to have greater fairness at the retail side. So oftentimes people will buy goods, pay HST. We just want to make sure that that HST is actually forwarded and collected by the government. All of those things are being taken into account. We've done a number of pilots already, and they've proven successful. We'll continue on.
Long day for you, Minister, and as always, we do appreciate you spending some of it with us here on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Charles Susa, Minister of Finance, the MPP for Mississauga South. And joining us now with reaction from across the aisle, Vic Fideli, he's the PC finance critic and the MPP for Nipissing, and Catherine Fife, the NDP finance critic and the MPP for Kitchener-Waterloo. 350 pages or so that you both had to sort of chew through today to find the most objectionable thing in there. Vic Fideli, what is it for you?
Well, the fact that everybody in the province of Ontario, when they wake up tomorrow morning, will find that life is harder for them. Their taxes are increased, and there's no relief in sight for the high hydro bills. And that's sad.
Just as the minister said, let's clarify. Their taxes are increased if they're driving, if they're smoking, if they're buying alcohol, but no income tax increases.
No, but you'll see in the budget $1.9 billion in income tax increases in the next year.
Catherine Fife, what did you find problematic?
Well, for us, I mean, we listened to the people of this province, and their primary concern was around jobs, around education, around healthcare. I don't know why you can call a budget jobs for today and tomorrow when you don't have a comprehensive job strategy and you continue to bring in policies that actually dissuade investment into the province of Ontario, like high electricity prices. We heard that from north, south, east, west, across the entire province, especially from those industries who are looking to draw investment, where Ontario actually should be attracting investment because of the low dollar. But when they do the full costing out and they look at the high price of electricity, and they look at for the north, of course, the lack of infrastructure investment, they say, you know what, we're not going to go there. And we heard that firsthand from delegations.
They did promise. You heard the minister say it, come hell or high water. The budget will be balanced next year. You believe him?
No. Quite frankly, what they're doing is playing a shell game, and we learned that now from the fall economic statement that came out and from our financial accountability officer, who confirmed that they are taking the revenue from the sale of Hydro One and putting that against the deficit. That is just absolute fact now. And we also learned today that they'll be doing a lot of that with the cap and trade tax as well. So the fact that we have a structural deficit, that means we still spend more than we take in. They're going to paper over it for a couple of years with one-time sale revenue from hydro. What happens when that runs out? We're back up. So they haven't fixed the deficit, they've covered it over.
I hear what you're saying, but everybody does that. I mean, when you weren't there, but when the PCs were in power back in the Mike Harris years, they sold the 407 highway and they used that money to make the books look better as well. Right? I mean, everybody does that.
Well, not right. They used it to pay down some debt as well, which this isn't doing. They are supposed to use the money from the sale of an asset of hydro and put it against the hydro budget. They're not doing that. They're putting a portion of it there. They passed a bill, a special bill, to allow them to move it out. Then they allowed themselves, through yet another bill, to be able to use that money to reimburse themselves for money already spent on infrastructure. So ostensibly, yes, they're putting the money into infrastructure, but they're taking the money that was already in infrastructure out and using that to pay the deficit.
And we actually have the financial accountability officer to look at, I mean, he did a report for us. He said that this is a very short-sighted plan. He confirmed that after 2018, after the balanced budget is attained, that we will actually see greater debt. You don't sell a public asset that actually produces revenue for education and for healthcare. And you know, we have to look at where this government is balancing and finding savings. And what we heard across the province, Steve, is that frontline healthcare, those hospitals saw this would have been their fifth straight cut to funding. So you're compromising healthcare, which is a huge value for the province of Ontario. And the last 3 years, cumulatively, we've seen $1 billion removed from education.
So let me ask you, given the healthcare needs you've identified, given the education needs that you've identified, should this government go back on its promise to balance the books next year, run another deficit for another year, and try to attend to some of those needs?
Well, we would look at other options, and those options include, I mean, you asked the minister right there the question about corporate taxes. Ontario has a combined corporate tax rate which is lower than Alabama. So that's nothing to be proud of, and there certainly isn't anything progressive about that. Also, we've pointed to the way that this government procures infrastructure, for instance, and the Auditor General said we spent $8 billion more than we needed to. So there are ways for this government actually to find that money. It should not be at the expense of the people who value healthcare, who value education. It's incredibly short-sighted.
No tax cuts in this budget. If it had been a Vic Fideli budget, would you have cut taxes?
Well, look, we always believe that lower taxes create jobs, and we need a low tax environment. But what we really need to tackle first and foremost is the energy sector, because as the CEO and president of Fiat Chrysler told us, in Ontario, we've created a high-cost jurisdiction. We have the highest energy rates in North America. We have the highest payroll taxes in Canada. We have the pension tax coming on. We have the carbon tax coming on. And basically, he said to Kathleen Wynne, enough's enough. You're stifling the growth of business. So there are ways to grow business, and there are ways to grow the budget without having to tackle the taxes.
I am going to follow up, though.
Yep.
Would a Vic Fideli budget have cut taxes?
Well, again, let me put it this way. Our revenue has grown in the province of Ontario virtually every single year since the Liberals took office. So when they took office, we were at $65 billion in revenue. Today, we're at almost $134 billion in spending. So the issue isn't, do you need more revenue? We have all the revenue we need in Ontario. We're just seeing a lot of waste, a lot of mismanagement, and the scandals that have chewed up a lot of the money. So I don't know that you would need to insert yourself in the tax structure at this point, either way, because the money that you need to run the province is there. It's just being mismanaged.
Okay, that's a fair answer. Asked and answered. Obviously, the NDP is pretty serious on the environmental file, and I'd like to know whether or not you support what this government's trying to do on the cap and trade issue.
Well, we've been, our critic, Peter Tabbins, has been very clear on climate change and very consistent. We do have some serious concerns, though, around the rollout of this strategy or this plan. One has to do with fairness. When California rolled out this cap and trade, they were really clear with the large emitters. They insisted that they become part of the plan right away. This government has given the large emitters a pass for 3 years, and yet everyday families are going to pay the price. They're going to see an increase in their monthly costs. So there's an issue of fairness. There's also an issue of transparency, and you can't doubt us for doubting the government. There's a trust issue here with the way that this government handles funds that come in, revenue that comes in, and we're talking conceivably about a lot of money, up to $1.9 billion.
I know, but now maybe I read this wrong, but I thought that they were intending to bring that money in and not just put it in general revenue to be spent on whatever willy-nilly, but to a specific separate fund for environmental plans. No?
So there's a crisis of confidence on that, and we're going to have to see. We're going to have to actually physically follow the money. I mean, what we would have liked to have seen is a regular review of where that money is going, an accountability measure, if you will, that shows, yes, the people of this province have had to pay $500 million, and this is where it went for job creation, and this is where it went, more importantly, perhaps, to reduce greenhouse gases.
I saw your leader today in the lockup say something that not many Conservative leaders around the world, never mind in this province, are prepared to say. Patrick Brown, in his first budget lockup, said the debate about climate change is over. We're not going to relitigate that. And I guess I need to know from you, do you like the government's plan to deal with that through this cap and trade scheme?
I absolutely agree with our leader that debate is over. I do not agree with the government's plan because they are treating it as a tax grab. So again, only today we saw for the first time they're treating it the same as the hydro sale money. They're taking the money in and they'll be passing a bill, which I've seen the bill, and it will allow them to reimburse. So again, will they be spending it on climate initiatives? In a sense, yes, but not legitimately. They'll cancel all kinds of programs, which we already saw some of them being canceled today, and then they will use that climate change money into reinitiating those programs. The money that was going to be saved will be used to lower the deficit. That's a fact. So it's a shell game again, that the money legitimately is not going to affect our greenhouse gases in Ontario.
Let me give 30 seconds left to each of you here to do something which Patrick Brown did in the lockup today, which was to say, actually, here's a few things in the budget I like. What'd you like in the budget today?
I was really pleased to see the hospice money come through. We have a hospice in North Bay and such a huge need, a hospice that's being planned in North Bay and fundraising. So when I saw that, I thought that was excellent. And the autism money. I mean, I've sat in my office when I meet with constituents, and they're just at an end of the road. And so those two initiatives, I thought, were well announced.
$333 million for autism over 5 years.
Yeah.
Your thought?
And so on that same point, Andrea Horvath, our leader, and Monique Taylor filed the critic for that portfolio filed an FOI. We found that there were 16,000 children on a wait list for autism services, ABA, IBI. So of course, very pleased. I mean that is our role as opposition members, is to try to hold this government to account for one of the promises they made and try to inform a piece of a document like this going forward. But I do want to point out that the people of this province weighed in on this document, and their voices are not truly reflected in it. And I think that creates a confidence in our democracy. And I think it's disingenuous for the finance minister to say, we listened. We're still writing our finance report to the finance minister to inform this budget. And so you have to call him on that.
We have been pleased to have your voices reflected on our broadcast tonight. Thank you so much, Vic Fideli, Catherine Fife, the two finance critics for the two opposition parties. Okay, let's hear from the Premier. Earlier this week, Premier Kathleen Wynne stopped by our studio to talk about the provincial economy, including the fiscal position of the province of Ontario. Have a look at what she said about her priorities for getting to the balanced budget.
Are we able to do the things that we know we need to do? Are we able to continue to fund education and healthcare? Are we working with businesses so that more jobs are being created? How are we doing in those areas that are of prime importance to the people of the province? And then let's have the conversation about the deficit. Because honestly, Steve, that's how our plan has worked all along. Every year we've said, okay, what are we able to do in terms of our priorities, our investments? How are we going to create more jobs? How are we going to work with the private sector? And then what's the impact on that on our fiscal situation of that. And you'll remember when I came in, we actually did increase the deficit. We actually increased the deficit for a couple of years in order to make investments.
And now, here's what the finance minister said today in the legislature about the province's deficit.
We are now projecting a deficit of $5.7 billion in 2015-16, reduced further to $4.3 billion in 16-17. And Mr. Speaker, this will be the last deficit before we erase it completely in 17-18.
There we go, the finance minister from the House earlier today. So, with that, time now for their views on this 2016 budget. We are delighted to be joined in Boynton Beach, Florida, by the former Liberal Minister of Finance. There's Greg Sorbera, looking pretty tanned and ready to join us this evening. And back here in our studio, Janet Ecker, former PC Finance Minister, Francis Lankin, the former NDP Cabinet Minister, Alan Odette, who's the President and the CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and Martin Redcon, political columnist for the Toronto Star. We've got experts near and far to tell us what they think about the budget. Greg, I do want to start with you, because you're the only sensible one here, not being locked up today in miserable weather, but rather being in Florida where you ought to be. I don't know if you were able to hear what the finance minister said at the top of the program about what you tried to do with making post-secondary education free. He didn't do that today. He made it freer for some, but he didn't go as far as you wanted to when you were finance minister. So what do you think of what he's tried to do on that front?
Well, Steve, firstly, I did have an opportunity to listen to him on the top of the program, and I actually had an opportunity to listen to the entire budget speech. And the initiatives for post-secondary were one of the things in the budget that I really liked. It's a step forward. I was advocating that eventually, in the fullness of time, Ontario should look at the first 3 years of university or 3 years of community college as part of the basic education system of the province. Today, the budget took a fairly significant step in that direction.
Okay, Janet, you're the only other person here on this program tonight besides Greg who's brought in a budget. What did you think about what they did today?
Well, I think that he didn't have a lot of room to maneuver because he is trying to meet deficit targets. And I think we were pleased to see that they are actually indeed meeting them.
So you have no doubt they'll balance next year?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Because I do think Vic Fideli does make a good point, is that, how much of that is actually structural. And that's something that I think a number of governments have wrestled with over the years. I mean, that was one of the issues that we had, is you can find ways to plug the gaps, but how do you structurally keep yourself at a deficit? But the other issue too is that even if they do meet those deficit targets, we have to keep in mind that there is still a whopping big debt. And I think one of the things that is probably keeping Charles Susa awake at night is he will be terrified if interest rates start to go back up, because that could just blow their fiscal picture completely apart.
Well, we saw $350 million every 1 point of interest rates. What caught your attention today?
Well, on the big items, no surprises. I'm glad to see infrastructure spending continuing and growing. We know about repurposing of hydro dollars and wine and beer we already knew about. Cap and trade we already knew about. I'm glad to see longtime supporter of a cap and trade system. I think Catherine Fife, I'll take after you. Catherine Fife made some really good points about the implementation. So there's some questions around those things. I think that there were some interesting pocketbook retail items like the drive clean elimination for Southern Ontario. We already don't pay it in the north where I come from now. So
another advantage to living in the north.
I know there's a lot of them, but that's an example. There's some minor increases in expenditures in some areas, and there's lots of cuts still. But it's good to see some money going into base hospital budgets. They have had a long time of no increases, and they're still going to struggle. I'm thrilled to see the thrust and the first step on the tuition piece. Mm-hmm. It is a repurposing, and I'm okay. I would like to see more money in education, and I think the criticism that this misses some of the basics for people around education and health. I think that's a criticism to take to heart, and I think that looking at the tax revenue side of it is the only way we're going to be able to address that in the long run. Some interesting first steps on recommendations that came out of the social assistance reform report that I worked on a number of years ago. It's taken a while to get there, but I'm glad to see those. I'm glad to see the pension, but I'm disappointed that there's really nothing really focusing on precarious employment, because I think the economic structure of jobs in our province is really a major problem that affects consumer confidence in a range of things. So I think it's walking the fine line between some progressive, socially progressive things and some tough fiscal conditions, with a focus on all the things that Alan Adet and the Board of Trade asked for,
well,
and
let's find
them
out.
all getting them.
Let's see what Alan says. Alan, they didn't touch corporate tax rates. You heard me ask the minister about that. You content with that?
We're content with that. We think it important to maintain a competitive corporate income tax rate relative to by and large, the states in which we compete.
What concerns you in this?
I think one of the things that concerns me, let me kind of reframe that. On debt and deficit, that was probably one of the number one things we had in our pre-budget submission. You need to tackle your deficit in order to get at long-term debt. Which
So do you believe them that they're going to balance next year? Does it look that way?
I believe they're going to do it. You have to believe it. I think they've had a bit of good fortune in finding some revenue they weren't expecting. We've had a lower dollar against the U.S. It's boosted our exports a little bit. I think if I were to describe a concern, it might be that we really need to think about changing and taking some cost out of the system, some structural cost.
For example?
So, for example, can we look at some more alternative service delivery type of models? We talked about Test Drive Ontario today. There are some things that the private sector, we believe, can deliver better customer service on budget, on time, at a better price than the government can do. And I think that, frankly, if we don't do that type of service delivery reform, many of the services that we've come to enjoy in the province might not be available in the future.
Martin, what caught your attention?
This budget strikes me as mostly a balancing act in terms of first having a balanced budget. I do think there is political will there. Obviously, they can't predict how the economy will play out, but they have set a target several years ago. It was slower than many people, including at the Chamber of Commerce, would have liked, but they're sticking to it. And so there's a lot of political credibility on the line. Their credit ratings will be on the line as well. But I think it's the right thing to do. I think they recognize that now, with a Liberal government in Ottawa that is talking deficits in a large scale and that want an electoral mandate for deficits, this government has less pressure on it now to stimulate the economy. On top of which, the economy, dare I say it, is actually doing very well in Ontario.
Very well?
Very well. 2.5% growth. It's higher than the national average. It's second or close to British Columbia or second. It had a very high rate of growth last year as well. I know that there is a sense of economic malaise, and I don't think that it's time to celebrate in Ontario. But if we're talking about economic stimulus and deficit financing, this is not the time to do it.
Let me ask Greg Soubert about that, because, of course, Justin Trudeau won the last election, many people have observed, as much for promising to run deficits as anything else. He thought this mantra of the balanced budget was overdone. This government has now pledged its sort of reputation on balancing next year. Do you think they should revisit that, Greg, if the needs for health care increase, if the needs for education increase, et cetera?
Well, we're getting pretty close to the point where they say they're going to balance. And that means that a year from now, they'll bring in a budget and they will say that the budget is balanced. I wouldn't have drawn that line in the sand were it me, but Kathleen decided to do that. And I think it's a reasonable position to take. But the fact is that you have to put at least an asterisk beside the commitment, because there are economic circumstances that could arise that could change the equation dramatically. But Justin Trudeau got elected not because he promised to run deficits, but because Canadians across the country were desperate to get rid of the Harper government, and they liked Justin as an alternative.
Okay, let me follow up with this. You know, of course, that as part of the cap and trade scheme that the government has brought forward, there's a modest increase in the price of gas, 4.3 cents per liter.
Yeah.
Next to a 30% per liter drop in the price of gas over the past year, that doesn't look like a huge increase. Is there a part of you, though, that is... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the fact is that if, although the minister said there are no tax increases, the fact is that there's a $1.9 billion increase, I call it a flow-through tax, that will ultimately affect consumers. Cap and trade is a system where the government sells to industry an imaginary product called carbon credits, and those industries pass the costs, $1.9 billion in this case, ultimately through the system, and it gives rise to higher prices at the gas pump for the gas that heats our homes, and ultimately for virtually every product that we buy. The issue that I have with it, I mean, it's an interesting way to raise money and say at the same time that you're not raising taxes. The issue that I have is I am not sure, because there's no evidence anywhere in the world that the cap and trade system actually does work to significantly reduce carbon emissions. And until I see that evidence, you know, I have to be a little bit skeptical about the whole scheme, other than it's going to bring a lot of new money into the government.
Let's get some feedback here. Alan, what's your view on the cap and trade plan they've brought forward?
Well, I haven't seen the regs that came through today, but what we've asked for is that you be very transparent with cap and trade, and notwithstanding the comments of your guest earlier, they've created a separate account for this. So the government has sort of 3 bank accounts now, the general ledger, the Trillium, and now this fund. So the funds will be separated. We asked for that. We've also asked that these funds be distributed in a way that will go right back into industry to help them become more effective, more efficient, et cetera.
And you believe that will happen?
I do believe it'll happen. They have allowed free allowances for large enterprise. They've created another fund, a green fund, to allow for small to medium-sized enterprise to adjust to this. So, listen, I think the debate is over in terms of whether carbon has an impact on the climate or not.
Martin, cap and trade?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's bugging Mr. Surbauer about that. I don't love cap and trade. It's a complicated system. It's opaque in many ways. It's had problems in Europe. But that's where the world is going. We had a
possibility. Some of the world's going there.
If the world was walking off a cliff, we wouldn't do that. I mean,
that's not a good analogy.
I'm not sure that doomsday analogy applies. But and I wasn't going there. What I was saying is that that's where the United States is probably going to end up, unless Mr. Surbauer knows what's happening in Florida and who the next president will be in the U.S. Or maybe he's under his influence.
Might be a Floridian. You never know.
Right. But the cap and trade is happening. We tried a carbon tax debate in Canada. People didn't like it, except in BC. So if we all accept, as Patrick Brown and Greg Sorbara do, that we need to have some kind of carbon pricing, cap and trade is really our only, by default, option. So I know Mr. Sorbara would like a pure gasoline tax. So we're having it in a more indirect way, but it's something that people will accept, more or less. It's the way to go. So it's not stealthy.
No, not cap and trade. I mean, and you know, it's not a question of if our greenhouse gas is good, bad, or whatever. I mean, that debate and people and the public wants action on this. It's a question of how you do that. And cap and trade in other jurisdictions has been abused. It hasn't worked well. Greg's quite right. It hasn't led to the outcome that they've wanted. And the other question that we have to be very careful about is exactly what's going to happen with the use of that money. I mean, if it's actually going to be able to be used for the purpose, terrific. But we've also seen too many examples where you get a big pot of money and there's already all kinds of people lining up with all kinds of great, wonderful ideas about, geez, we could use this money for this and this and this. And I think that's something we really have to keep an eye on. So I think, to me, I think the carbon tax with the compensation, I think what BC did was simple, straightforward. That's how we should have done it.
We're not doing that, though.
That doesn't change anything in terms of what the impact on the consumer is. It still gets passed through. So
well,
the
no,
question is,
BC tried to make cuts in other areas to compensate
but what
for
is
that.
going to, well, and if you look through the budget, there are other examples that we could see where there are incentives and programs and money that's going to go back into industry. So I think the question is, where do you have more possibility of affecting the behavior of industry with respect to their carbon footprint? And if you have the money dedicated and you invest in good ideas, and I agree with you, there'll be people coming forward with crackpot ideas. I mean, there has to be a good system there. But, you know, that's like when I used to be an active trade unionist, and I would get up and say, well, and even at our party conventions, I like this, but it doesn't go far enough. I mean, we can always criticize what we don't know is happening yet. That's right. But I think that this affords us an opportunity to try and influence the behavior both of consumers and of industry, and I think it's the right time to move on this. Now, one last thing I'll say, I've heard people say it's got to be transparent. I agree. It's got to be fairly applied, and the question about who gets a pass and when they get a pass and for how long, I think we should be having some discussion about. And the third criteria people say is it's got to be effective, and I think that goes to your point. It's got to be investing in things that are going to change behavior.
Alan, the government claims that this is going to create new industries, new jobs, innovation. Do you see that happening?
Well, I think if this is done right, this could create tremendous opportunity, leadership opportunity for Ontario, where I think you're starting to see China move in this direction. I think you'll see the United States move in this direction. If we're out ahead of the curve, we've allowed our businesses to become more effective, more efficient, more productive, then that could lead to a strategic competitive advantage for Ontario businesses in the future.
There's a lot of ifs and coulds there.
Understood.
That's the challenge. A lot of ifs and coulds.
A quick point on all the ifs and coulds on cap and trade. I don't love it, as I say, but unlike a carbon tax, cap and trade actually will reduce emissions by statute, so they will, or by regulation. So carbon tax doesn't do that.
I mean, but in other jurisdictions where they've tried it, the system was gamed. It was not.
The good thing is
really
we were so slow. We've waited 8 years for that some of those kinks to be worked out. So Quebec has done it, and it hasn't screwed up yet.
Let me ask. I want to go back to the original question I asked Greg Sorbero, which is, if you were still the Minister of Finance in Ontario, would you simply have avoided all of this and knocked the price of gas up maybe another 20 cents a litre or something like that?
Well, I was arguing pretty strenuously in last year's budget that the government should do just that, because there was room there. The price of gas had gone dramatically down, and the government needed revenue. And the fact is that, a 4.3% per litre increase in the price of gasoline will not change behavior, not a bit. If you put it up 15 cents, then people will start thinking about doing things differently, and they can use that revenue to do all the other wonderful things that you want to do to reduce greenhouse gases. But my fear is that the system is not proven. My other fear is that, unlike a carbon tax or a gasoline tax or a carbon tax, cap and trade requires a very significant bureaucracy. And this government has a very large bureaucracy. The last thing it needs is to add hundreds of people to the offices around Queen's Park to deal with cap and trade. I like a simpler system and one that is more efficient and more direct.
Okay, let me put a new issue on the table here. And Janet, I'll start with you first. There are a lot of things in this budget that deal with seniors. Some of the seniors are going to like. If you're 65 to 70 years old, eligible, you may get free shots for singles now. Shingles, excuse me. Not singles. Shingles. Gosh. I have a great punchline on that right now, but I'm not going to say it because it's X-rated.
Several lines, but anyway.
Anyway, but there are others. Like, for example, if your income is higher than a certain level now, you're going to have to pay more co-payments. You're going to have to pay a higher deductible. Politically, is that a tough sell?
It can be, but I think it's fair. I mean, I think if you are, a senior on a higher income, I think that you do need to start looking at copay and ways to spread that money around, because we all know, I mean, even with some of the improvements that they've made in healthcare funding today, like I sit in a hospital board, all of us, you deal with the system. The healthcare system is struggling because the costs there, it's just such an incredible pressure. The government never has enough money to put in there. So I think anything that helps ease those pressures, I think is a good thing to do. And I think a copay, there's going to be some pushback because seniors, I mean, we're all part of the baby boom generation, and the world's been our oyster ever since we were born, and we expect it to continue. So they're probably going to hear about it at the door. But I think it's the right thing to do.
Martin?
So I think it's a bit of a wash. Do I think it's a great thing? No. I think seniors will squawk when they are at the pharmacy and say, hey, I'm getting hit up for more money. But more people will get free drugs out of this because they've raised the threshold. So more people will now be eligible for free drugs. So in essence, it cancels itself out. I don't like co-payments. I believe passionately in pharmacare. I don't think this is a big deal. You're being asked to pay $100 more a year overall if you can afford it.
Francis?
I actually agree with what Martin just said. When I was Minister of Health, we had to look at issues around co-pays on the drug program, and I resisted so strongly through that. And I was at a dinner at the Bassett home, and John Bassett said, Minister, tell me what's fair about the fact that I send my chauffeur in my limo to the drugstore to pick up my free drugs, right? And I was a little bit taken back, except the defense of universality, and that programs that have thresholds and programs that start to add to marginal effective tax rates in terms of affecting people's behavior of what they will do or what they won't do, become complicated and they can become a slippery slope. So in my utopian world, we would get to pharmacare and we would get to a program where we didn't have co-pays and we wouldn't be dealing with this.
I'm intrigued with the notion that you're hanging out with John Bassett. That's
no, I wasn't. I was a minister. You have to do these sorts of
I
things.
see.
It was an invitation from Isabel when she chaired the board at Ryerson. It was about Ryerson University.
There we go.
So there you go.
It wasn't NDP fundraising, I hope.
No, it wasn't indeed. Your notion on whether or not this is the way to go?
I would say only my concern is I'm not sure that we're adopting new innovations in healthcare at a rate or a pace in which we could or should to drive productivity in the healthcare space. I also sit on a hospital board. I come from 30 years in the biotech, biopharmaceutical space, and Ontario, frankly, is a last mover in adopting innovation. And in order to truly bend that curve in healthcare, we're going to have to find a different way of adopting innovation more quickly.
Let me follow up with Greg on that, because if I read the budget properly, the healthcare spending last year over this year is 2%. Now that's a long way from the 5s, 6s, and 7s that we used to see back in the day. So can we say with any certainty that this government is in fact bending the healthcare cost curve?
Yeah, I think they are, although I don't think they'll quite meet the 2%. I think when the numbers come in at the end of the year, it'll be slightly higher. But, it's not dependent on some minor variation with seniors' drug prescriptions. And I think the real issue with seniors and drugs is that far too many seniors in Ontario are taking far too many drugs. When they have to pay, if they are low income, they should get a break. Personally, I picked up a subscription for myself about a month and a half ago, and the pharmacist gave it to me and said, "That will be $1, sir." And I said to her, "That's just stupid." And it was. I mean,
it was stupid because why?
Why am I paying one? Well, it was stupid because, the government of Ontario is paying the other, I don't know, $15 or $20 associated with the prescription. And that's just not right. In this case, I'm with John Bassett.
Okay.
Can I just say in terms of the healthcare budget and seniors in particular, so we can focus on the drug copayment. I think the answer is pharmacare. I'm not fussed particularly about this one particular move, but the more basic issue, and talking about getting down to basics is getting the care that you need when you need it. Okay. And for seniors, more often than not, it's a balance between the kind of in-home care that you get, and there are some moves forward in the budget on that, but also the kind of acute care that you get in the hospitals, that boards that you sit on. And quite frankly, we're still losing nurses in this province by large numbers. And that is the kind of care that seniors need, the kind of responsive health care and the kind of basics that I think we're losing sight of in claiming to be the lowest per capita jurisdiction on expenditures. Right. I appreciate the need on the deficit, and I appreciate the need on the debt. The choices in between there on some of the basics around health and education, I think we need to examine as we go forward.
Yeah, well, and I mean, when you look at I can remember when, we increased health care and it was a lot more than 2%.
We meaning the Harris government.
The Harris government, and we were slashing health care. So I am always amazed at how they've been able to bend that cost curve and not have the political pushback that previous governments have had. But just to give you some flavor on it, I mean, the inflation, the natural inflation in the healthcare system overall is roughly, 6% a year, like just standing still. It can be 6% more. Drug plans can be like 10% more a year, and they're holding it at 2%. So the question is it going to drive change and innovation? It's not doing it so far, and it's not sustainable. Okay. And that's the challenge, I think, for Minister Sousa going forward.
I got a minute left here, and I do want to ask you, because the pension plan was restated in the budget today, and I know your group has had serious problems with the ORPP as it's brought forward. Did you hear anything today that assuaged any of your concerns?
We haven't. I can say that the government has listened to us. They were not going to be able to roll this out in the time frame in which they wanted to, so they have listened. It's been delayed in terms of implementing it for a year. I think what we're asking of them now is, can we look at some type of offsets, whether it's lower reduction in electricity prices or some kind of a tax incentive to make sure that when we do introduce this, that we can mitigate against any risk to small to medium size and even large enterprise competitiveness.
Are you confident that can happen?
I have confidence today that the government has pivoted. They've reframed the narrative today, I think, to look at jobs and economy. And I think some of the things that we've seen in this budget seems that they're serious about doing that.
Okay.
So you have to have some confidence.
That's our time, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Greg Sorbera, we're all jealous of you, and thanks for joining us on the line from Boynton Beach, Florida.
Down.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Thanks so much, Greg, and to everybody here in the studio as well. Martin, Francis, Janet, Alan, great to have you alongside on TVO tonight as well.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.